Hi, I'm Cloud Dweller, and I'm an anarchist. I've wanted to start this series on leftist activism in the aftermath of the George Floyd uprisings this summer, because it feels like, for a moment, we had true revolutionary potential. But in the times since those early days, we've seen reactionaries mobilize around an anti-anarchist type of rhetoric that opportunistically paints everything left of center as too radical. It's been a very effective PR campaign waged from the highest levels by unscrupulous politicians seeking re-election. Images of people of color rioting have cynically been taken out of context and weaponized to sow fear and division. The rioting has widely been conflated with violence on news outlets, more concerned with ratings than nuance. But as was written in graffiti on the walls of looted shopping malls in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Black Americans could have never looted as much as was owed to them. But after months of attrition wearing away at the white American psyche, these public relations tactics have stubbornly imprinted upon the popular imagination, which now embraces fantasies in which droves of black-clad anarchists rove the streets seeking out suburbs to pillage. And the irony, though sad, should not be lost on us, that this uprising over the course of the summer of 2020 was sparked by an act of violence by a white police officer against an unarmed black citizen who was not resisting. I couldn't watch all 8 minutes and 46 seconds of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck. It's too inhuman. There are no words for it. And since then, violence has been perpetrated by police against peaceful protesters in city after city, from beatings to pepper spray to tear gas to rubber bullets. Many of these are weapons banned in combat, and they've been used on American citizens by their own government. Protesters have been kidnapped into unmarked vans by supposed officers who refuse to identify themselves as law enforcement. But we all heard Trump deflect blame from the federal agents and right-wing militias to say, Antifa is the real problem. Anti-fascist action is now seen as terrorism in a supposedly free society. Antifa can only be credited with 2 deaths, and one was assuredly self-defense. Let's contrast that for a moment with the white supremacists who kill hundreds a year and are not somehow considered terrorists despite using fear to drive their tactics. But the left, which has fought for peace since the 60s, has absurdly been tarred as violent. So this channel is about showing the real face of leftism in the community and to tell the stories of real work people are doing to make what improvements we can to address issues like poverty and homelessness, all from outside established systems. But for every anarchist that has thrown a can of soup at riot cops, there are far more of us carrying cans of soup into homeless encampments to try and make less harsh the deprivations of homelessness during a pandemic. Leftists have organized tenant unions to oppose predatory landlords who have tried to flout eviction moratoriums with tenant intimidation. Leftists have built solidarity networks and built coalitions to give voice to the people's needs, while our elected officials refuse to represent our interests. We are dreamers and schemers who get our hands dirty. In the movement, I've met single mothers, people with 2 to 3 jobs, people in school full-time, somehow fitting in time for the cause. I've seen people giving wholly of themselves to help others in ways I can really only describe as inspiring. These are the stories I would like to amplify from the noise. Much like many of you, I first heard the term anarchist as a teenager through the Anarchist Cookbook. I had a text file attributed to the Jolly Roger, not to be mistaken with William Powell's text assembled in the 1960s. This text contained apocryphal instructions for dubious recipes, which would likely cause as much harm to the person using the manual as it would to the intended target. I probably didn't fully understand the term anarchist until I had moved to the Bay Area. I started frequenting bound together books on Haight Street. I soon found myself reading Bakunin, Emma Goldman, Howard Zinn, and eventually more radical authors like Ward Churchill, and Peter Gelderloos. But more interesting to me, I started reading Kropotkin's Mutual Aid as a Factor of Evolution. Mutual aid examines the false claims of social Darwinism and supplants them with examples from nature where species not only avoid competition, since it's typically ruinous to both competitors, but also copious examples of cooperation in the animal kingdom. It lays out a basis for society and mutual aid rather than competition as both a moral and also economic imperative, since capitalism is not only destroying relationships between mankind, it is also laying waste to the world upon which we all reside. I started seeing anarchism as a model for building a new world in the shell of the old by addressing failures of the state and capitalist markets. Using voluntary association and direct democracy, we can build a society that solves problems through consensus building, not force and competition. This is perhaps seen as impossible or utopian, but anarchism is not an inflexible dogma. We are aiming in the direction of broader social justice, and are willing to adjust our course if we're not observing the desired results. The idea is to strive for universal human dignity. Philosophies aren't useful if they aren't practical, however. So I've made associations with groups in my community whose work I hope to highlight here. I've been in the streets and at protests and at the distributions and in the signal chats, and I've been doing the work with you together to try and build a world that works for all of us. This series will highlight voices from that struggle, people who are passionately engaged in their communities, who tirelessly give of themselves to better their corner of the world, because that's what leftists really care about. In the coming months, I hope to build a series of conversations that provide the inspiration and practical knowledge to get out there and do it yourself. Please like, follow, and subscribe, but don't stop there. We need you in the streets and in the Google Sheets. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.